Manhattan, New York, Blackwood and Associates law firm. The whiskey burned as it went down while Carter Blackwood stared at the ultimatum that would reshape his entire future. 6 months, Carter. Either you find yourself a wife or you lose everything. His grandfather, Harrison Blackwood, dropped the leather briefcase onto the mahogany desk that had overseen 4 generations of legal victories. I refuse to leave Blackwood and Associates in the hands of a 30-year-old bachelor who treats dating like a hobby. Grandpa, this is completely unreasonable. What's unreasonable is seeing my grandson splashed across every gossip column in the city with a different woman each month. The elderly patriarch's sharp green eyes blazed with determination. Your great-great-grandmother Elizabeth founded this firm in 1898 with nothing but grit and determination. I won't let you squander her legacy because you can't settle down. Carter jumped to his feet, his chair spinning backward into the wall of leather-bound legal volumes. You can't just force someone to fall in love? I'm not forcing anything. I'm providing motivation. Harrison produced documents that were clearly prepared well in advance. 6 months, 1 genuine relationship, a proper engagement that meets family standards. No more of those ridiculous fake arrangements like you had with that Instagram model. Embarrassment flooded Carter's face. How did you? I know everything that matters, son. A satisfied smirk played across the old man's lips. Including the fact that she posted about your breakup on social media before you even got home from your supposed romantic weekend in Miami. The humiliation stung worse than any courtroom defeat. 3 years of working 18-hour days to prove he deserved to inherit Blackwood and Associates, Manhattan's most prestigious corporate law firm, and his grandfather still viewed him as an immature playboy. Fine, the word came out rough and determined. I accept your terms. They're not terms, they're requirements, and there's another condition. Harrison settled into his executive chair with obvious satisfaction. She must receive full family approval. Sunday brunches, holiday gatherings, formal introductions to our entire social circle. Carter moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Central Park. 28 stories below, 8 million New Yorkers lived their lives completely unaware that a century-old legal dynasty hung in the balance of his romantic decisions. What if I simply leave, open my own practice somewhere else? With what capital? Your trust fund remains frozen until you fulfill these requirements. Harrison glanced at his vintage Patek Philippe watch. I need to depart now. Your grandmother expects me for lunch at Le Bernardin. The irony wasn't lost on Carter. 54 years of wedded bliss, while he couldn't sustain a meaningful conversation about commitment with any woman. One final detail. His grandfather paused at the mahogany door, manicured hand resting on the brass handle. If you attempt any deception, hiring an actress or orchestrating another publicity charade, the entire firm transfers to your cousin Victoria. Carter's pulse stopped. Victoria, the overachieving perfectionist who'd graduated summa cum laude from Yale, currently transforming their London branch into the most profitable international division in the firm's history. You wouldn't actually do that. Challenge me and find out. Those calculating green eyes sparkled with amusement. She's already submitted a comprehensive business plan that would increase our annual revenue by 55%. The door closed with a gentle click that sounded like a judge's gavel sealing his fate. Carter loosened his silk tie, feeling the pressure of 5 generations weighing on his shoulders. The silver-framed photograph on his desk displayed his great-great-grandparents, Elizabeth and Jonathan, on the day they established the firm in Lower Manhattan. 2 people who'd built an empire together, creating a legacy that now depended entirely on his ability to find authentic love within 6 months. Unbelievable, he muttered, massaging his temples. His phone chimed with a text from Marcus, his closest friend and fellow attorney. Saw the photos from the charity gala last night. You and Sophia looked amazing together. Why don't you bring her to one of your family's legendary Sunday brunches? Carter studied the attached images. He and Sophia waltzing, sharing intimate conversations, appearing completely enchanted with each other. The connection seemed genuine, but She's practically engaged to that hedge fund prince. Last night was just a favor to help her dodge those aggressive photographers. Dude, you need to stop rescuing women from their romantic disasters and start creating your own love story. Carter laughed without humor. Marcus was absolutely right. His reputation as a serial dater was largely fabricated. He actually spent more time helping women escape complicated relationships than he did pursuing them romantically. His office door swung open unexpectedly. Carter anticipated seeing Harrison returning with additional demands, but instead... "Pardon me," said a warm voice with the faintest trace of a Midwestern accent. "I'm searching for Mr. Blackwood, regarding the paralegal opening." Carter turned around, and the world seemed to pause. The woman standing in his doorway was thoroughly drenched, obviously caught in the surprise thunderstorm that had swept across Manhattan an hour earlier. Her auburn hair clung to her face in wet spirals, and she gripped a portfolio that was steadily dripping onto his imported Italian marble flooring. But her eyes, warm amber like autumn leaves, burned with a fierce determination that cut straight through his frustration. "You want the 12th floor," Carter managed to say. "Human Resources Department." 12th? She examined a soggy document in her hands. "This clearly states 28th. Oh no." The paper completely dissolved. The rain destroyed everything. She surveyed his opulent office, the wall of first edition legal texts, the antique Persian carpet, the spectacular panoramic view of Manhattan, and her shoulders drooped slightly. "I apologize for interrupting. She drew a steadying breath, straightening her posture. "I relocated here from Chicago last week, still learning my way around the city." Chicago. That explained the subtle accent, crisp and friendly. "No problem at all," Carter heard himself responding. "I can contact HR and actually," she interjected, a self-deprecating smile brightening her features, "maybe I should return tomorrow. Today obviously isn't working in my favor." She pivoted toward the door, and something deep in Carter's chest constricted, an inexplicable urge, like he needed to act, to speak. "Hold on." The words escaped before his rational mind could intervene. She stopped, glancing back over her shoulder. And that's precisely when the declaration burst from his lips, charged with a desperation he didn't realize he possessed. "The first woman who walks through that door is going to be my wife." The silence that followed was absolutely thunderous. She spun around completely, blinking repeatedly as if convinced she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Carter swallowed hard. What on earth did I just declare? It's an incredibly complicated situation. Clearly. She folded her arms, creating another small puddle on his pristine floor. "And I would be the completely wrong person," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Perfect, because I'm obviously in the wrong building, seeking the wrong position, and apparently just stumbled into the wrong conversation entirely." She shook her head, sending water droplets in all directions. "I'm Sage, by the way, Sage Mitchell, and you're absolutely out of your mind." Despite the chaos of the moment, Carter found himself genuinely smiling, the first authentic smile he'd experienced all day. Carter Blackwood, and yes, quite possibly. Sage arched one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "You just announced our marriage without even learning my name." "Technically, I didn't propose marriage. I simply declared you would become my wife. There's a nuanced but significant legal difference." "Ah, a legal technicality." She nodded with exaggerated seriousness. "That definitely improves everything." The dry sarcasm in her voice should have served as a warning, but instead Carter felt liberated. Finally, someone was addressing him like a regular person, not the Blackwood heir apparent. "Listen," he said, stepping closer to her. "I realize this will sound completely irrational, but would you be willing to hear the entire story? I can at least provide you with a towel and some excellent coffee." Sage observed him carefully for several heartbeats, her intelligent amber eyes analyzing every detail of his expression, as if she were decoding an intricate legal brief. "Coffee?" she finally repeated. The finest in all of Manhattan. Guaranteed. And this story of yours? I promise every word is truthful, regardless of how insane it might sound. She exhaled slowly, glancing down at her waterlogged clothing, then toward the rain still hammering against the windows. All right, Mr. Blackwood. But only because I desperately need caffeine and a dry space to wait for this storm to pass. Carter, he corrected, experiencing an unexpected warmth spreading through his chest. Please, just call me Carter. Fine, Carter. She stepped completely into his office. Now explain to me why you decided a total stranger would make an ideal wife. And as Sage crossed his threshold entirely, trailing rainwater and carrying with her the fresh scent of a summer storm, plus an energy unlike anything he'd ever encountered, Carter realized that perhaps, just perhaps, fate had an extraordinarily twisted sense of timing. Or maybe he'd just committed the most catastrophic error of his entire life. Only time would reveal which. Manhattan, New York, Blackwood and Associates, executive floor. Let me understand this correctly. Sage wrapped her fingers around the steaming coffee mug, finally feeling warmth return to her hands. She'd accepted Carter's jacket and borrowed a plush towel from his private bathroom, transforming from a drowned rat into someone who looked reasonably professional. Your grandfather is essentially blackmailing you into marriage. Within 6 months, Carter confirmed, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed. Without his suit jacket, his white dress shirt revealed broader shoulders than she'd initially noticed. To someone who passes rigorous family inspection. And you thought the brilliant solution was to declare matrimony with a random stranger who stumbled into your office? I didn't declare matrimony. Right, you made an announcement. Much more sophisticated. Sage took a sip of coffee and had to admit it was exceptional. Rich, smooth, probably cost more per pound than her weekly grocery budget. So what's your actual strategy here, Carter? Because I'm assuming you didn't genuinely expect me to swoon and accept your bizarre non-proposal. Carter began pacing behind his desk, running his hand through his thick dark hair in a way that was annoyingly attractive. Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. When those words came out of my mouth, I was thinking about my great-great-grandmother Elizabeth. She used to tell this story about knowing my great-great-grandfather Jonathan was her destiny the instant he walked into her father's bookshop. Romantic, Sage said dryly, but I hate to shatter your illusions. I wandered into your office hunting for employment, not a husband. About that position. Carter stopped pacing and looked at her directly. The job you applied for is actually in my department, corporate law. We've been desperately seeking someone with Midwestern business experience, particularly someone who understands both small-town values and big-city operations. Sage's eyebrows shot up. Are you serious? Completely. Your resume landed on my desk 2 days ago. Sage Mitchell graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern, specialized in corporate compliance, worked for Henderson and Associates in Chicago for 4 years before. He paused, consulting his mental notes. Before personal circumstances brought you to New York. The coffee mug trembled slightly in Sage's hands. You memorize my file? It's part of my job. Though I have to say, your cover letter was refreshingly candid. Most applicants don't admit they're escaping something. I never said I was escaping anything. You wrote that you were seeking a completely fresh beginning in a new environment, far from previous complications. In legal terminology, that's definitely escaping. Sage set her mug down with deliberate force. Maybe I should leave right now. Please don't. Carter stepped closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated. I apologize, that was presumptuous and unprofessional. Your personal motivations are absolutely none of my business. No, they're not. But she remained seated, studying his expression. Beneath the polished exterior and designer suit, there was something genuinely vulnerable in his dark eyes. Why did you really say what you said? And don't give me some fairy tale about your ancestors. Carter was silent for several moments, gazing out at the storm clouds rolling across Manhattan's skyline. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unexpected depth. Because I'm exhausted from being what everyone expects me to be. The irresponsible heir, the commitment-phobic playboy, the guy who can't take anything seriously. He looked back at her. When you walked through that door, soaked and determined and completely unimpressed by all this, he gestured around his luxurious office. You looked at me like I was just a regular person, not a Blackwood legacy, just Carter. You are just a regular person, Sage said softly. Try convincing my family of that, or the tabloids, or every woman I've dated who saw my trust fund before they saw me. The raw honesty in his voice surprised her. She'd anticipated arrogance from someone in his position, heir to a legal empire, undoubtedly accustomed to getting whatever he desired. But this felt authentic. So, what exactly are you asking me? She said carefully. Carter's expression sharpened. What do you mean? I mean, I can practically see the gears turning in your head. You're formulating some kind of plan. So what is it? A slow, almost mischievous smile spread across his face. Has anyone ever mentioned that you're extremely perceptive? Occupational necessity. Paralegals learn to read people and situations quickly. Exactly. Carter resumed pacing, his energy suddenly focused and intense. All right, this is going to sound completely insane. More insane than announcing our impending marriage. Potentially. He stopped directly in front of her. What if we could help each other solve our respective problems? I'm listening. You need employment. I need a fiancé. What if you accepted the paralegal position in my department and played the role for 6 months? Sage stared at him. You're actually serious. Completely serious. Think about it logically. It would resolve both our dilemmas. You'd get an excellent job, Sage. Outstanding salary, comprehensive benefits, opportunity to work on major international cases that could launch your career to the next level. And I'd satisfy my grandfather's requirements without having to navigate the nightmare of genuine dating right now. And after 6 months? After 6 months, we have a perfectly amicable separation. You'd have 6 months of prestigious experience at Manhattan's top corporate law firm on your resume. I'd have my inheritance secured and complete control over my own romantic future. Sage leaned back in her chair, processing the proposal. You're talking about an elaborate deception involving your entire family. I'm talking about a mutually beneficial business arrangement with clear parameters and defined outcomes. Your grandfather isn't stupid, Carter. Neither is the rest of your family. You think they won't see through a fake relationship? Who says it has to look fake? Carter sat on the edge of his desk, closer to her now. We're both intelligent, articulate people. We obviously have natural chemistry. Otherwise, you would have walked out of here the moment I made that ridiculous declaration. Natural chemistry? Sage raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when he smiled like that. You're still here, aren't you? She was quiet for a moment, turning the idea over in her mind. It was absolutely crazy. It was also tempting. The job alone would solve her immediate financial problems and give her the career boost she desperately needed after the disaster in Chicago. And Carter, despite his privileged background, seemed genuinely decent. Troubled, maybe, but not malicious. What would be the specific expectations? She asked slowly. Carter's eyes lit up. He could sense her wavering. Nothing inappropriate, I promise. We'd need to spend time together, attend family functions, maybe a few public appearances, but completely professional. Separate living arrangements, clear boundaries, full respect for your comfort level with everything. And if I wanted to end the arrangement early? You could leave any time, no questions asked. I'd provide excellent references and even help you find another position if needed. Sage studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What she saw instead was hope mixed with desperation. A man who genuinely believed this crazy plan might actually work. There's something you're not telling me, she said finally. What happened in your last relationship? The real story, not whatever the gossip columns printed. Carter's expression darkened. Her name was Vivian. We dated for 8 months, the longest relationship I'd ever had. I thought I thought maybe she was different, that she actually cared about me, not just the Blackwood name and fortune. But she wasn't. I found out she was feeding information to reporters the entire time. Every private conversation, every family gathering, every vulnerable moment. She was documenting all of it for a tell-all book deal. His jaw tightened. The worst part was that I'd actually started falling for her. Started thinking about a real future together. "I'm sorry," Sage said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "It was educational," Carter replied, but she could hear the hurt underneath the casual tone. "It taught me that in my world, it's almost impossible to know someone's true intentions. But with you, there's no pretense, no hidden agenda, just an honest business arrangement between two people who need something from each other." Sage was quiet for several minutes, weighing the pros and cons. It was risky, potentially disastrous if they were discovered. But it was also an incredible opportunity, and she desperately needed a break after everything that had happened in Chicago. "I have conditions," she said finally. Carter straightened, trying to contain his excitement. "Name them." "First, I want the job offer in writing, with a standard employment contract that's completely separate from this other arrangement. If the fake engagement falls apart, my employment isn't affected." "Done." "Second, we establish clear rules and boundaries from the beginning. No surprises, no changing expectations, complete honesty about what this is and isn't." "Absolutely." "Third, I want to meet your family before I agree to anything. If I'm going to convince them I'm genuinely in love with you, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Carter grinned. "That's actually brilliant. Sunday brunch this weekend. Are you free?" Sage took a deep breath, hardly believing what she was about to say. "I suppose I am now." "So you'll do it?" She looked around his office one more time, the law books, the expensive artwork, the view of Central Park, then back at Carter's hopeful expression. 6 months of pretending to be engaged to a handsome, wealthy lawyer, while building her career at one of the most prestigious firms in the country. There were definitely worse ways to spend half a year. "I'll do it," she said. "But Carter?" "Yeah? If this backfires spectacularly, I'm holding you personally responsible." Carter's smile could have powered half of Manhattan. "Deal. But Sage?" "What?" "I have a feeling this might be the best decision either of us has ever made." As Sage shook his offered hand, sealing their unusual agreement, she couldn't help but wonder if Carter might actually be right, or if she'd just agreed to the most elaborate mistake of her entire life. Only time would tell. But as she looked into his dark eyes, still sparkling with relief and excitement, she realized she was actually looking forward to finding out. Upper East Side, New York, the Blackwood family estate. Sage stood outside the imposing limestone mansion on East 78th Street, clutching a bottle of wine that probably cost less than the doormat she was standing on. The Blackwood family estate rose 4 stories above her, its Georgian architecture screaming old money and established power. Ivy climbed the walls in perfectly manicured patterns, and the brass fixtures gleamed like they were polished daily. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, checking her reflection in the gleaming black door. She'd spent 3 hours shopping for the perfect outfit. Professional but not stuffy. Elegant but not trying too hard. The navy blue wrap dress and modest heels struck what she hoped was the right balance. The door opened before she could ring the bell. "You must be Sage." The woman standing before her was stunning in that effortless way that money could buy. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair, flawless makeup, and a smile that didn't quite reach her Arctic blue eyes. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, Carter's cousin. We've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Sage replied, extending the wine bottle. "Thank you for having me." Victoria accepted the bottle with the kind of polite enthusiasm usually reserved for disappointing holiday gifts. "How thoughtful. Please come in. The family is gathered in the conservatory." As they walked through the marble foyer, Sage tried not to gawk at the oil paintings lining the walls. Generations of stern-faced Blackwood staring down at her with judgmental expressions. The house smelled like money and furniture polish, with an underlying scent of fresh flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "So," Victoria said, her heels clicking against the polished marble, "Carter tells us you're from Chicago. How quaint. I spent a summer there during law school. Charming in its own way, I suppose." The subtle condescension in her tone was unmistakable. Sage had encountered plenty of Victoria types in her career, people who wielded their privilege like a weapon, making others feel small with perfectly polite cruelty. "Chicago has its charms," Sage agreed mildly, "though I'm finding New York quite exciting. So many opportunities." "Yes, Carter mentioned you're working at the firm now." "In what capacity exactly?" Before Sage could answer, they entered a stunning glass-walled room filled with exotic plants and antique furniture. The conservatory overlooked a private garden that belonged in a magazine spread, complete with a fountain and perfectly pruned topiary. "Sage!" Carter appeared at her side instantly, and she felt her tension ease slightly. He looked different in casual clothes, dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost black. More approachable, less intimidating. "I was starting to worry you'd changed your mind." "Just fashionably late," she said, accepting his brief kiss on the cheek. The gesture felt surprisingly natural, and she caught a hint of his cologne that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sage Mitchell," Carter announced, his hand settling possessively on the small of her back. "Sage, this is my family." The introductions began in a blur of names and faces. Harrison Blackwood dominated the room even while seated, tall, silver-haired, with sharp green eyes that missed nothing. His wife Eleanor was elegant in that understated way that came from generations of good breeding, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. "Welcome to our home, dear," Eleanor said warmly, though Sage noticed her gaze was assessing. "Carter has told us so little about you. We're simply dying to know everything." "Now, Mother, don't overwhelm her," laughed a man who could only be Carter's father. The same dark hair, though streaked with gray, and the same strong jawline. "I'm Richard Blackwood. This is my wife, Patricia." Patricia Blackwood was a study in Manhattan perfection. Blonde highlights, tasteful jewelry, and a smile that was warm but cautious. "It's lovely to meet you, Sage." Carter seems absolutely smitten. "The feeling is mutual," Sage replied, glancing up at Carter with what she hoped looked like genuine affection. His response, a soft smile that crinkled his eyes, seemed entirely too real for comfort. "Please, sit," Harrison commanded more than requested, gesturing toward an antique settee. "Tell us about yourself, Miss Mitchell. Carter has been surprisingly secretive about your courtship." Sage perched on the edge of the settee, hyper-aware of Carter settling beside her, close enough that their thighs touched. "There's not much mystery, really. We met when I interviewed for a position at the firm." "How romantic," Victoria said dryly, taking a seat across from them with the fluid grace of someone who'd been attending these gatherings her entire life. Love among the legal briefs. "It wasn't exactly love at first sight," Carter interjected, his arm sliding along the back of the settee behind Sage. "More like confusion at first sight. I think I stunned her into silence with my brilliant legal arguments." "He stunned me with something," Sage agreed, earning a few chuckles from the assembled family. "Though I'm not sure brilliant is the word I'd use." "She keeps me humble," Carter said, and there was something in his voice that made Sage look at him sharply. For just a moment he wasn't performing for his family. He was looking at her like she actually did keep him humble. "And where exactly did you practice in Chicago?" Harrison asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Henderson and Associates," Sage replied smoothly. "Corporate compliance primarily, small firm, but we handled some interesting cases." "Never heard of them," Victoria said dismissively. "But then there are so many little firms in the Midwest." "Victoria," Patricia chided gently, "not everyone needs to work for a Manhattan powerhouse to be successful." "Of course not," Victoria agreed with a smile that could cut glass. I'm sure Henderson and whatever it was served its purpose. Sage felt her temper flare but kept her expression neutral. Henderson and Associates, actually. And yes, it served its purpose quite well. What brought you to New York? Eleanor asked, clearly trying to steer the conversation into safer waters. Career advancement? This was the question Sage had been dreading. She'd prepared an answer, but sitting here surrounded by Carter's family, the lie felt heavier than expected. Partly, she said carefully. But honestly, I needed a fresh start. Chicago held too many memories. Ah, Harrison said knowingly. A broken heart brings another victim to our fair city. Tale as old as time. Something like that, Sage agreed, grateful for the assumption that was close enough to the truth to feel comfortable. Well, their loss is certainly our gain, Carter said, his fingers brushing against her shoulder in what looked like an unconscious gesture of comfort. I can't imagine what Chicago was thinking, letting this one get away. The way he said it, warm and protective, made something flutter dangerously in Sage's chest. This was supposed to be an act, but Carter's defense of her felt entirely too real. So tell us, Eleanor said with the kind of smile that meant business. How serious are things between you two? Carter's never brought anyone to Sunday brunch before. Sage and Carter exchanged a quick glance. This was it, the moment they'd prepared for. Pretty serious, Carter said, reaching for Sage's hand. His fingers intertwined with hers naturally, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that sent unexpected warmth up her arm. Actually, we have something to tell you all. The room went completely silent. Even Victoria looked genuinely surprised. We're engaged, Sage said, managing to infuse her voice with just the right amount of joy and nervousness. The explosion of reactions was immediate and overwhelming. Eleanor gasped and pressed her hands to her chest. Patricia squealed and jumped up to embrace them both. Richard grinned and clapped Carter on the shoulder. Even Harrison looked pleased, though he tried to hide it behind his usual stern expression. Only Victoria remained seated, her expression unreadable. Engaged, Eleanor exclaimed, tears already forming in her eyes. Oh my goodness, when did this happen? Do you have a ring? When's the wedding? There's so much to plan. Mother, breathe, Carter laughed, though Sage could feel the tension in his hand where it gripped hers. It just happened. Last night, actually. Last night? Patricia looked confused. But where's the ring? Sage's heart stopped. They hadn't thought about a ring. How could they have overlooked something so obvious? It's being sized, Carter said smoothly, and Sage marveled at his quick thinking. I wanted it to be perfect, so it's at the jeweler until Tuesday. Smart man, Richard approved. Your grandmother always said the ring should fit like it was made for her finger. What kind of stone? Victoria asked suddenly, her voice carrying a sharp edge. Diamond, sapphire, something more unconventional. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sage realized Victoria was testing them, looking for inconsistencies in their story. It's a surprise, Sage said, squeezing Carter's hand slightly. He won't tell me anything except that it belonged to someone special. My great-great-grandmother Elizabeth's ring, Carter said without missing a beat. The one she wore when she founded the firm. I had it reset with a more modern setting. The answer was perfect. Romantic, family appropriate, and completely unverifiable until Tuesday. Harrison actually smiled, the first genuine warmth Sage had seen from him. Elizabeth would have loved that, the patriarch said gruffly. She always said that ring would find its way to the right woman eventually. Speaking of which, Eleanor said, practically bouncing with excitement, we simply must have an engagement party, something elegant but not too formal. The Harvard Club, perhaps? Or would you prefer something more intimate? Mom, Carter protested. We haven't even had time to discuss. Nonsense. This is too important to leave to chance. Patricia, you'll help me plan, won't you? And Sage, dear, you must let me know your preferences. Colors, flowers, guest list. As the women launched into party planning mode, Sage felt overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. This was supposed to be fake, temporary, a simple business arrangement. But looking around at the genuine joy on their faces, even Victoria seemed to be warming up slightly. She realized how real the consequences of their deception would be. "Are you all right?" Carter murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "Just processing," she whispered back. "Your family is intense." "You're doing great," he assured her, his thumb still tracing patterns on her hand. "They love you already. Even Victoria." Carter glanced at his cousin, who was now engaged in animated conversation with Eleanor about venue options. "Victoria's always suspicious of change, but she'll come around. And if she doesn't, then we'll deal with it," Carter said simply. "Together." The word "together" shouldn't have made her feel as warm as it did. This was temporary, she reminded herself. A 6-month arrangement with clear boundaries and defined outcomes. So why did sitting here, surrounded by his family, with his hand in hers and his promises in her ear, feel like the most natural thing in the world? "Sage, dear," Eleanor called out, interrupting her thoughts. "What do you think about a spring theme? Pale yellows and whites, perhaps some early roses." "That sounds lovely," Sage replied, forcing herself to focus on the conversation instead of the way Carter's fingers felt against hers. "Wonderful. We'll need to book the venue soon. All the best places fill up months in advance, though I suppose being Blackwoods gives us certain advantages." As the conversation swirled around her, Sage realized she was in much deeper waters than she'd anticipated. This wasn't just about fooling Carter's grandfather anymore. These people were planning a real party, making real emotional investments in their fake relationship. And the most dangerous part of all, she was starting to enjoy it. Carter's family was overwhelming, certainly, but they were also warm, welcoming, and genuinely happy for what they believed was his happiness. For someone who'd grown up with just her grandmother after her parents died, the chaotic energy of a large, loving family was seductive. "I should probably head home," she said eventually, as the afternoon stretched toward evening. "Early day tomorrow." "Of course," Eleanor said, immediately shifting into hostess mode. "Thank you so much for joining us, dear. I hope this is the first of many Sunday brunches together." The round of goodbyes took another 20 minutes, with hugs and promises to call and reminders about the engagement party planning. By the time Carter walked her to the street, Sage felt emotionally exhausted. "That went well," Carter said as they stood beside her taxi. "Better than I hoped, actually." "Your family is lovely," Sage said honestly. "Also terrifying. Your grandmother is already planning our entire engagement party. She's excited. We haven't had anything to celebrate in the family for a while." Carter's expression grew serious. "Are you having second thoughts? Because if this is too much—" "No," Sage said quickly, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "No second thoughts. Though we definitely need to get our story straighter. What if someone asks how you proposed, or where we went on our first date?" "You're right. We should probably spend some time this week getting our facts aligned." Carter opened the taxi door for her. "Dinner tomorrow? We can work out the details." "Sounds like a plan." Sage slid into the back seat, then looked up at him through the open door. "Carter?" "Yeah?" "Your family really loves you. Don't take that for granted." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. "I won't," he said quietly. "And Sage? You were perfect today." "Thank you." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Sage watched Carter through the rear window until he disappeared from view. The afternoon had been a success by any measure, but it had also been a wake-up call. She was playing with real people's emotions, real family dynamics, real consequences, and somewhere in the middle of all that performance and pretending, she'd started to forget it was supposed to be fake. The most dangerous part wasn't that Carter's family might discover their deception. The most dangerous part was that she was starting to wish it wasn't a deception at all. And that was a complication she definitely hadn't signed up for. Soho, New York. Vesper restaurant Sage arrived at Vesper 15 minutes early, a habit she'd developed during her years in Chicago's cutthroat legal scene. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place she'd expected Carter to choose. Understated elegance with exposed brick walls, dim lighting that managed to be romantic without trying too hard, and the kind of prices that didn't appear on the menu because if you had to ask, you probably couldn't afford it. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a black silk blouse tucked into charcoal slacks, professional enough for their supposed business meeting but sophisticated enough for the upscale venue. Her reflection in the restaurant's windows showed a woman who looked confident and put together, which was exactly the opposite of how she felt inside. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of second-guessing and analysis. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the genuine joy on Eleanor's face when they'd announced their engagement, or the protective way Carter's hand had settled on her back during the family gathering. The line between performance and reality was blurring faster than she'd anticipated, and that scared her more than she was willing to admit. Sage. Carter's voice behind her made her turn, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. He'd traded his casual family brunch clothes for a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and when he smiled at her, something warm and dangerous unfurled in her stomach. "Hi," she managed, accepting his light kiss on the cheek that was becoming their standard greeting. The gesture sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, and she had to remind herself that this was all part of their arrangement. Public displays of affection to sell their story, nothing more. "You look beautiful," Carter said, his hand briefly touching the small of her back as the hostess led them to their table. The compliment sounded genuine enough to make her cheeks warm, which was ridiculous considering he was probably just staying in character. Their table was tucked into a corner alcove that provided privacy, while still allowing them to see and be seen. Perfect for a couple who needed to discuss sensitive matters without appearing suspicious. Carter held her chair, another gesture that felt more natural than practiced, and Sage found herself wondering if he was this attentive with all the women he dated, or if this was part of his performance for her benefit. "So," Carter said once they'd ordered wine and appetizers, "how are you feeling about yesterday? Any regrets about diving into the deep end of Blackwood family dynamics?" Sage took a sip of the wine, a ridiculously expensive Bordeaux that probably cost more than her weekly salary, and considered her answer carefully. "Your family is overwhelming, but in a good way. I can see why you'd want to protect them from disappointment." "Even Victoria?" Carter's mouth quirked up in amusement. "I noticed she wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat." "Victoria's protecting something she loves," Sage replied diplomatically. "I can respect that, even if it makes my life more complicated." Dean Carter leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. "You're being very diplomatic. Most people would have stronger opinions about someone who spent the afternoon taking subtle shots at them." "I've dealt with worse," Sage said, then immediately regretted the admission. She wasn't supposed to reveal too much about her past, even to Carter. "Want to talk about it?" Carter asked gently. "The real reason you left Chicago." The question hung between them like a challenge. Sage had prepared a vague story about wanting a change of scenery, but something in Carter's expression, genuine concern mixed with curiosity, made her hesitate. How much truth could she afford to share with someone who was supposed to be a temporary business partner? "It's complicated," she said finally. "Let's just say I learned some hard lessons about trusting the wrong people and leave it at that." Carter nodded slowly, and she could see him filing away the information for future reference. "Fair enough. We all have things we'd rather not discuss." "Like your ex-fiancé who was writing a tell-all book?" Sage countered, then immediately felt bad for the deflection. "Sorry, that was unnecessarily harsh." "No, you're right to bring it up," Carter said, surprising her. "If we're going to make this work, we need to understand each other's baggage. Vivian taught me that even when you think someone loves you for yourself, there's always the possibility they're seeing dollar signs instead of the person." "Is that why you chose me?" Sage asked quietly. "Because I don't know enough about your world to have ulterior motives?" Carter was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass as he considered his answer. Partly, he admitted. But also because when you looked at me in my office that day, you weren't impressed by the expensive furniture or the view of Central Park. You were annoyed that I'd made a ridiculous declaration without even knowing your name. You treated me like I was just some guy who'd said something stupid, not the Blackwood heir who could potentially advance your career. You are just some guy who said something stupid, Sage pointed out, earning a genuine laugh from Carter that transformed his whole face. Exactly. And that's incredibly rare in my world. Their appetizers arrived, some kind of artisanal flatbread that probably had a story involving organic ingredients and traditional preparation methods, and they spent a few minutes eating in comfortable silence. Sage found herself watching Carter's hands as he ate, noting the long fingers and the absence of any rings. Those hands had been surprisingly gentle when they'd touched hers during the family brunch, and she wondered if the calluses on his palms were from some kind of sport or hobby that didn't fit his privileged background. So, she said, forcing herself to focus on business, we need to get our story straight before your grandmother starts interviewing us separately about wedding plans. Good point, Carter agreed, pulling out his phone to take notes. Let's start with the basics. How long have we been dating? 2 months, Sage suggested. Long enough for it to feel serious, but short enough to explain why your family hadn't met me before. Perfect. And our first date was dinner, Sage said automatically, then paused. Actually, let's make it something more specific, something we could both describe in detail if someone asks. Carter thought for a moment. The High Line. Evening walk, then dinner at a place in the meatpacking district. Which place? Gansevoort Market. Casual, good food, the kind of place where you can actually have a conversation without shouting over the music. Sage made mental notes, impressed by how easily Carter was building their fictional history. And you asked me out how? Coffee, Carter said with a slight smile. You came to my office for work-related meetings, perfectly legitimate, and I kept finding excuses to bring you coffee. Finally worked up the courage to ask if you'd like to continue the conversation outside the office. The scenario was so believable that Sage found herself almost wishing it had happened that way. And I said yes because despite your better judgment, you found me charming. Charming? Sage raised an eyebrow. That's a strong word. Fine, mildly entertaining. Better. Sage took another sip of wine, feeling some of her earlier tension ease. This was easier than she'd expected. Carter had a natural storytelling ability that made their fictional relationship feel plausible. So we had dinner, and then what? Then I walked you home like a gentleman and didn't try to kiss you on the first date, which impressed you enough to agree to a second date. Very presumptuous of you to assume I was impressed. Were you not impressed by my restraint? Carter's eyes sparkled with humor, and Sage realized he was flirting with her. Actually flirting, not just building their cover story. I was impressed by your survival instincts, Sage replied dryly. I would have probably kneed you in a very uncomfortable place if you'd tried anything on the first date. Carter laughed again, that warm, genuine sound that was becoming dangerously familiar. Good to know. I'll keep that in mind for future reference. Future reference. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them addressed directly. Second date, Sage prompted, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. Museum. The Met, specifically. You mentioned loving art history, and I wanted to impress you with my sophisticated cultural knowledge. Do you actually know anything about art history? Not a thing, Carter admitted cheerfully. But I'm very good at reading plaques and pretending to have deep thoughts about brushstrokes. So you're admitting you'd lie to impress me. I'd educate myself to impress you, Carter corrected. There's a difference. The distinction was subtle but important, and Sage found herself appreciating the honesty behind it. And how did this hypothetical museum date go? Wonderfully, until I made some completely incorrect observation about a Van Gogh, and you politely corrected me with enough detailed knowledge to make it clear you actually knew what you were talking about. Embarrassing for you. Incredibly attractive to me, Carter said, his voice dropping slightly. Intelligence is incredibly appealing. The comment felt too real, too personal for their fictional story-building exercise. Sage felt her cheeks warm and took another sip of wine to buy herself time to respond. So, after you made a complete fool of yourself at the Met, I redeemed myself by taking you to a coffee shop in the village where we spent 3 hours talking about everything except work, Carter continued smoothly. That's when I realized you were different from anyone I'd ever dated. Different how? Carter was quiet for a moment, his expression growing serious. You asked me what I wanted to do with my life, not what I was expected to do. And when I gave you some generic answer about following in the family footsteps, you called me out on it, said it sounded like I was reciting a press release instead of talking about my actual dreams. The detail was so specific, so personal, that Sage wondered if Carter was drawing from real experience. And what did you tell me? The truth. That I'd never really thought about what I wanted, because I'd always assumed my path was predetermined. And you said that was the saddest thing you'd ever heard. Sage set down her wine glass, studying Carter's face carefully. That's a very detailed fictional memory. Is it fictional? Carter asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, we've never had that specific conversation, but the sentiment is accurate. You do make me think about what I actually want instead of what's expected of me. Carter, I know, he said quickly. I know this is supposed to be business. I'm not trying to complicate things. I'm just saying that the best lies are built on foundations of truth. Their main courses arrived before Sage could respond, giving her a few moments to process Carter's words, while the server explained the preparation and wine pairings with a kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for religious experiences. By the time they were alone again, she'd managed to compose herself enough to continue their story-building exercise without addressing the dangerous territory Carter had just introduced. Third date, she said firmly. Carter smiled, understanding her need to retreat to safer ground. Sailing. Took you out on the family boat for a sunset cruise around Manhattan. You'd never been sailing before, and you spent the first hour gripping the railings like you expected to be thrown overboard at any moment. But I relaxed eventually. Eventually. Especially after I explained that the boat was virtually unsinkable and that I'd been sailing since I was 8 years old. And that's when you knew you were falling for me, Sage asked, trying to keep her tone light and professional. That's when I knew I was in trouble, Carter said softly. Because watching you discover something new, seeing the exact moment you stopped being afraid and started enjoying yourself, I realized I wanted to be the person who showed you new things. I wanted to be the reason you smiled like that. Sage's breath caught in her throat. The way Carter was looking at her, the sincerity in his voice, it didn't feel like story building anymore. It felt like a confession. That's very romantic, she managed to say. Your family will love that story. Will they? Carter asked, still watching her with those too perceptive dark eyes. Yes, Sage said firmly, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon with more force than necessary. Very believable. They continued building their fictional relationship history through the main course, creating a timeline of dates and milestones that would satisfy any family interrogation. A weekend in the Hamptons, where Sage met Carter's college friends. A charity gala where Carter introduced her to his business associates. Quiet evenings at her apartment cooking dinner and watching movies. Each story was carefully crafted to explain their comfort level with each other, while maintaining the timeline that led to their recent engagement. But underneath the practical planning, Sage was increasingly aware of undercurrents she hadn't expected. The way Carter's eyes lingered on her face when she talked, the way her pulse quickened when he laughed at something she said, the way their fictional relationship stories felt less like lies and more like possibilities. So the proposal, Sage said as they shared a dessert that was more art installation than food. How did you pop the question? Carter was quiet for a long moment, his spoon suspended halfway to his mouth. Actually, I've been thinking about that. And? What if we told them the truth? Sage nearly choked on her wine. Excuse me? Not the whole truth, obviously. But the part about you walking into my office during a rainstorm. The part about me being struck speechless by this beautiful, determined woman who wasn't impressed by my expensive furniture. Carter, you can't tell them you declared me your wife before you even knew my name. Why not? It's romantic in its own completely insane way. Love at first sight. Instantaneous recognition of soulmates, all that. It's also completely unbelievable. Is it? Carter set down his spoon and leaned forward slightly. Think about it, Sage. The best lies are the ones that contain the most truth. You're walking into my office, the rainstorm, the coffee, the immediate connection we felt. All of that actually happened. The connection we felt, Sage repeated weakly. You can't deny there was something, Carter said quietly. Otherwise, you would have walked out the moment I made that ridiculous declaration. But you stayed. You listened. You agreed to this crazy plan. Sage felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at dangerous waters. I stayed because I needed the job. Did you? Carter's voice was gentle but persistent. Because based on your qualifications, you could have found work anywhere. You didn't need to agree to fake an engagement with a stranger. Carter. She didn't know how to finish the sentence, didn't know how to explain that he was right without admitting things she wasn't ready to acknowledge. I'm not trying to pressure you, Carter said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. The touch sent electricity up her arm, making her hyper-aware of everywhere their skin connected. I'm just saying that maybe this doesn't have to be entirely fake. Maybe we can see where it goes naturally, without the pressure of expectations or timelines. Sage looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, warm and solid and surprisingly comforting. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, exactly why she'd tried to keep their arrangement purely professional. But sitting here in the intimate lighting of the restaurant, with Carter's thumb tracing gentle circles on her knuckles, she found herself wavering. This is complicated, she whispered. The best things usually are, Carter replied. What happens when your 6 months are up and you have your inheritance secured? What happens when you don't need a fiancé anymore? Carter was quiet for so long that Sage looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What if by then I don't want to let you go? The words hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Everything about this situation was risky. Professionally, personally, emotionally. She'd come to New York specifically to avoid complications like this, to rebuild her life on her own terms, without depending on anyone else. But looking at Carter, seeing the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior, she realized she might already be in deeper than she'd intended. I think, she said carefully, we should focus on getting through the next 6 months before we worry about what comes after. Carter nodded, though she could see disappointment flicker across his features. You're probably right. One day at a time. One day at a time, she agreed. But even as she said the words, Sage knew she was lying to herself, because somewhere between his ridiculous declaration in his office and this moment in the restaurant, Carter Blackwood had stopped being just a temporary solution to her problems. He was becoming something much more dangerous, someone she could actually fall for, and that was a complication that could destroy everything she'd worked so hard to build. The check arrived with impeccable timing, allowing them to retreat from the emotional intensity of the conversation. Carter insisted on paying, of course, and Sage didn't protest. She was too busy trying to process everything that had just happened, everything that had shifted between them over the course of a single dinner. Outside the restaurant, Manhattan pulsed with its usual evening energy, taxis honking, people hurrying toward subway entrances, the distant sound of music spilling from bars and clubs. Carter hailed a cab for her, ever the gentleman, and they stood on the sidewalk making awkward small talk about their schedules for the next day. Thank you for dinner, Sage said as the taxi pulled up to the curb. And for everything. The story building, I mean. I think we're ready for whatever your family throws at us. I hope so, Carter said, opening the cab door for her. Sage? Yes? He looked like he wanted to say something important, something that would change the careful balance they'd been maintaining. Instead, he just smiled and said, "Sleep well." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Sage watched Carter through the rear window until he disappeared into the crowd. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked composed and in control, but inside, she felt like everything was shifting beneath her feet. 6 months, she reminded herself. This was supposed to be a simple 6-month arrangement with clear boundaries and defined outcomes. So why did it feel like she just agreed to something much more complicated and infinitely more dangerous? And why, despite all her reservations and fears, was she looking forward to finding out where this unpredictable path would lead them? Manhattan, New York, various locations. The engagement ring arrived on Tuesday morning via private courier, delivered in a burgundy velvet box that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sage stared at it through her office window, because of course Carter had arranged for the delivery to be visible from her desk, trying to reconcile the stunning piece of jewelry with the reality of their situation. Elizabeth Blackwood's ring had been transformed into something breathtaking. The original Victorian setting had been modernized into a classic solitaire that showcased the central diamond's brilliance while maintaining the vintage charm of the smaller stones that encircled the band. It was elegant without being ostentatious, timeless without being outdated, and absolutely perfect for someone who was supposed to be madly in love with Carter Blackwood. "Holy cow, Sage!" Jenny, the receptionist, practically pressed her face against the window separating their workspaces. "Is that what I think it is?" Word traveled through the law firm with the speed of light in a vacuum. Within 10 minutes, Sage had been surrounded by half the female staff, all wanting to see the ring that had supposedly captured Carter Blackwood's heart. She slipped it onto her finger with trembling hands, marveling at how perfectly it fit. Carter must have somehow figured out her size, though she couldn't imagine how. "My goodness," breathed Margaret Chen, one of the senior partners, examining the ring with the expertise of someone who'd appraised plenty of jewelry and divorce settlements. "That's at least 3 carats, and the clarity is exceptional. Mr. Blackwood certainly doesn't do anything halfway." "It was his great-great-grandmother's," Sage managed to say, trying to sound appropriately smitten while her heart hammered against her ribs. "He had it reset for me." The collective sigh from the assembled women was audible. Even Margaret, who was notoriously cynical about romance after 30 years of handling acrimonious divorces, looked genuinely touched. "That's incredibly romantic," Jenny gushed. "Family heirloom, completely custom setting, and it fits you perfectly. How did he know your ring size?" Sage opened her mouth to answer, then realized she had absolutely no idea. Before she could come up with a plausible explanation, Carter appeared in her doorway, looking unfairly handsome in a navy suit that probably cost more than her car. "Ladies," he said with that charming smile that had probably launched 1,000 gossip column articles, "I hope you're not overwhelming my fiancé with too much attention." "Carter!" Jenny practically bounced with excitement. "The ring is absolutely gorgeous. Sage is so lucky." "I'm the lucky one," Carter replied smoothly, but his eyes were fixed on Sage with an intensity that made her stomach flutter dangerously. "How does it feel, sweetheart?" The endearment rolled off his tongue so naturally that Sage almost forgot it was part of their performance. "Perfect," she said softly, and meant it in more ways than she cared to examine. "How did you know my size?" Carter's smile turned slightly mischievous. "Trade secret. Can I steal you away for a moment? There are some details about the engagement party we need to discuss." The crowd of admirers reluctantly dispersed, though Sage caught several of them sneaking glances back at her as they returned to their desks. She followed Carter into his office, hyper-aware of the weight of the ring on her finger and the way it caught the light with every movement. "Close the door," Carter said quietly. Sage hesitated for a moment, then complied, turning the lock for good measure. The click seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of his office. "How did you really know my ring size?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where this entire charade had begun less than a week ago. Carter looked slightly embarrassed. I may have asked Jenny to borrow a ring from your jewelry box when she was helping you set up your office yesterday. I told her I wanted to surprise you with earrings that would match your existing jewelry. You had Jenny go through my personal belongings. Sage wasn't sure whether to be impressed by his thoroughness or annoyed by the invasion of privacy. I had Jenny help me plan a romantic surprise for my fiancé, Carter corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Sage twisted the ring around her finger, still marveling at how perfectly it fit. This is all getting very elaborate, Carter. Very real. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, Carter said carefully, leaning back in his chair. The more authentic our relationship appears, the more convincing it will be to my family. And after 6 months? What happens to the incredibly expensive family heirloom when we have our amicable separation? Carter was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. We'll figure that out when we get there. That's not an answer, Carter. It's the only answer I have right now, he admitted. Sage, I know this is complicated. I know we're operating in uncharted territory here, but can we just take it one day at a time, see how things develop naturally? There was that word again, naturally, as if anything about their situation could be considered natural. But looking at Carter, seeing the genuine uncertainty in his expression, Sage found herself nodding. One day at a time, she agreed softly. Carter's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Good, because my mother called this morning with engagement party plans that would make a royal wedding coordinator weep with envy. How elaborate are we talking? The Harvard Club. Next Friday night, 200 of our closest friends and family members, Carter said dryly. She's already hired a photographer, a string quartet, and a florist who apparently once did arrangements for the Metropolitan Opera. Sage felt the blood drain from her face. 200 people? Carter, I don't even know 200 people in New York. Don't worry about the guest list. Most of them are family friends and business associates who are there to see and be seen. You'll know maybe 20 people, max. Carter stood up and moved around to perch on the edge of his desk, closer to her chair. But we will need to spend some time together before the party. Get comfortable with each other. Practice our couple dynamic in public settings. Practice our couple dynamic, Sage repeated slowly. What exactly does that involve? Dinner dates, maybe a weekend afternoon in Central Park, some casual shopping together where we might run into people we know, Carter explained. The kind of things engaged couples do when they're madly in love and can't keep their hands off each other. The image his words conjured, Carter's hands on her body, his mouth on hers, the two of them lost in the kind of passion she'd only read about, sent heat rushing through her veins in a way that was entirely too vivid and entirely too appealing. Professional boundaries, she reminded herself as much as him, though her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. We agreed on professional boundaries. Did we? Carter asked softly, and suddenly he was much closer than he had been a moment before. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. Carter. She meant it as a warning, but it came out sounding more like an invitation. I'm not going to kiss you, Carter said quietly, though his gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment. Not unless you want me to. But Sage, we can't fake the kind of chemistry my family will be looking for. They know me too well. They'll see through any performance that doesn't feel genuine. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop fighting what's already happening between us and see where it leads, Carter said simply. I'm suggesting we give ourselves permission to explore this connection without overthinking every moment or analyzing every feeling. Sage's heart was beating so hard she was certain Carter could hear it. Everything he was saying made sense from a practical standpoint. They did need to be convincing as a couple, and chemistry couldn't be manufactured. But the practical reasons were getting tangled up with personal desires she'd been trying very hard to ignore. What if it gets complicated? She whispered. What if it gets wonderful? Carter countered. Before Sage could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The interruption broke the spell that had been building between them, and she fumbled for her phone with hands that weren't entirely steady. The message was from an unknown Chicago number, but she recognized it immediately. Her blood turned to ice as she read the words that made her carefully constructed new life feel suddenly fragile. "Found your new address. We need to talk. David." "Sage?" Carter's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sage stared at the phone screen, her mind racing. David had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, despite changing her phone number and using her grandmother's maiden name on her lease application, he'd tracked her down. "I need to go." "What?" "Sage, wait." But she was already standing, grabbing her purse and heading for the door with the kind of desperate urgency that came from pure panic. Carter caught her arm gently but firmly before she could reach the handle. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Whatever just happened, whatever that message said, we can figure it out together." "There is no together, Carter," Sage said, more harshly than she'd intended. "This is fake, remember? A business arrangement. You don't need to solve my problems." Carter's expression shifted from concern to something that looked almost hurt. "Maybe the arrangement started as fake, but what's happening between us right now feels pretty real to me." "Well, it's not," Sage lied, hating herself for the way his face changed. "And I need to go." She pulled free from his gentle grip and fled his office, ignoring the curious stares from her colleagues as she grabbed her coat and headed for the elevators. She needed air, space, time to think about what David's reappearance meant for her carefully constructed new life. The elevator seemed to take forever, and when the doors finally opened on the ground floor, she practically ran through the lobby and onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The October air was crisp and sharp, cutting through her panic just enough to let her breathe again. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from David's number. "Don't ignore me, Sage. I know about your new job, your new life. We have unfinished business." Sage's hands were shaking as she typed back, "Leave me alone." "I have nothing to say to you." The response came immediately. "That's not your decision to make. We need to discuss what happened in Chicago, what you took from me, what she took from him." As if exposing his embezzlement and illegal business practices had been theft instead of justice. As if protecting herself and other innocent people from his schemes had been some kind of betrayal instead of basic human decency. Sage found herself walking without any particular destination, letting the rhythm of the city carry her along while she tried to figure out how to handle David's reappearance. She'd been so careful when she left Chicago, so thorough in covering her tracks. But David had always been resourceful, especially when it came to getting what he wanted. Her phone rang, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought it might be David calling. But Carter's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation she answered. "Sage." His voice was warm with relief. "Thank goodness. Are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, then realized she was standing outside a Starbucks in Midtown with no memory of how she'd gotten there. "I'm just taking a walk, clearing my head." "The message you received, was it about Chicago? About whatever made you leave?" Sage closed her eyes, leaning against a brick wall and letting the city noise wash over her. Carter's concern was genuine. She could hear it in his voice, and part of her desperately wanted to tell him everything. But their arrangement was supposed to be temporary, professional, uncomplicated. Adding her baggage from Chicago would change everything. "It's not your problem," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Carter agreed, "but maybe I want it to be." The simple honesty in his words nearly undid her completely. "Carter, I know you don't owe me any explanations," Carter continued. "I know our arrangement doesn't include solving each other's personal problems. But Sage, I care about what happens to you, not because of the engagement or the inheritance or any of that. I care because you're important to me." Sage felt tears prick at her eyes, surprising herself with the emotion. When was the last time anyone had said she was important to them? When was the last time she'd felt like she mattered to someone beyond what she could do for them? I worked for someone in Chicago, she said, before she could second-guess herself. Someone who turned out to be involved in some very illegal activities. When I discovered what he was doing and tried to report it, things got complicated. Complicated how? Sage took a shaky breath. He was stealing from client accounts, falsifying documents, bribing officials to overlook regulatory violations. When I found evidence and went to the authorities, he tried to make it look like I was the one who'd been embezzling. It took months to clear my name, and by then my reputation in Chicago legal circles was destroyed. Carter was quiet for a moment, and she could practically hear him processing the implications. And now he's contacted you here. He seems to think I owe him something, that reporting his crimes was somehow a betrayal. Sage laughed bitterly. He destroyed my career, my relationships, my entire life in Chicago, and he still thinks he's the victim. Sage, listen to me very carefully, Carter said, his voice taking on a sharp, authoritative edge that reminded her he was one of Manhattan's most successful corporate lawyers. This person cannot hurt you here. You're under the protection of Blackwood and Associates now, and we have resources he can't even imagine. If he's threatening you or attempting any kind of harassment, I will personally make sure he regrets it. The fierce protectiveness in Carter's voice sent warmth flooding through her chest. She'd been handling David's manipulation and threats alone for so long that having someone offer to stand with her felt almost surreal. You don't understand what you're offering to take on, she said softly. David Hartley is connected, wealthy, and completely ruthless. He's not going to be intimidated by lawyers or threats. Then it's a good thing I'm not just any lawyer, Carter replied smoothly. And it's an even better thing that you're not alone anymore. Carter, this could affect your inheritance, your family, everything we're trying to accomplish. I don't care, Carter interrupted firmly. Some things are more important than money or family approval, or any of this other nonsense. Your safety is more important. Your peace of mind is more important. Sage felt something crack open in her chest, some carefully maintained wall she'd built around her heart after everything that had happened in Chicago. Carter barely knew her, had no reason to risk anything for her benefit, and yet he was offering to stand between her and David without hesitation. Why? She whispered. Because you matter, Carter said simply. Because you're brave and intelligent and kind, and because the world is a better place with you in it. Because whoever this David person is, he already took enough from you, and I won't let him take anything more. Sage closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her like a warm embrace. She'd spent so many months feeling isolated and defensive, protecting herself from anyone who might hurt her the way David had. But Carter was offering something she'd almost forgotten existed. Unconditional support from someone who cared about her well-being more than their own convenience. I should go home, she said finally. Think about how to handle this. Not alone, Carter said immediately. Let me come with you. Or better yet, let me take you somewhere David can't find you while we figure out our next steps. Carter, you don't need to. Yes, I do, Carter interrupted gently. Not because of our arrangement or our fake engagement or anything related to my family. Because you're important to me, Sage. Because I'm starting to care about you in ways that have nothing to do with business or convenience or any of the practical reasons we started this. The admission hung between them like a bridge, and Sage realized she was standing at another crossroads. She could retreat into her carefully maintained independence, handle David's threats the same way she'd handled everything else since Chicago, alone. Or she could accept Carter's offer of support and see what it felt like to trust someone again. Where did you have in mind? She asked quietly. She could hear Carter's smile through the phone. My apartment. It's secure, private, and David, whatever his name is, will never be able to find it or gain access. We can order dinner, make a plan, and you can get a good night's sleep without worrying about unwanted surprises. Your apartment? Sage's pulse quickened at the implications. Carter, I'm not sure that's a good idea. The boundaries we talked about are still completely in effect, Carter assured her quickly. I have a guest room with a lock on the door, and I give you my word that nothing will happen that you don't want to happen. This is about your safety and peace of mind, nothing else. Sage found herself nodding even though he couldn't see her. Okay, yes, thank you. Stay where you are. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. How do you know where I am? Because I know you, Sage Mitchell, Carter said warmly. When you need to think, you walk. And when you need comfort, you gravitate toward coffee shops. I'm betting you're somewhere in Midtown, probably within 3 blocks of a Starbucks. Sage looked up at the green and white sign directly above her head and couldn't help smiling despite everything. You're very observant. It's part of my charm, Carter said lightly. 10 minutes, okay? Don't go anywhere. After he hung up, Sage found herself staring at the engagement ring on her finger, watching the way it caught the afternoon sunlight. When Carter had first suggested that their fake relationship might develop into something real, she'd been terrified of the complications that would bring. But now, with David's threats looming over her carefully rebuilt life, she was beginning to understand that maybe some complications were worth the risk. Maybe trusting Carter, letting him help her, allowing their relationship to develop beyond their original business arrangement, wasn't the dangerous mistake she'd thought it would be. Maybe it was exactly what she needed. Carter's sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb exactly 10 minutes later, and Sage slid into the passenger seat with a sense of relief that surprised her with its intensity. Carter looked at her carefully, his dark eyes searching her face for signs of distress. Better? He asked quietly. Getting there, Sage replied honestly. As they drove through Manhattan traffic toward Carter's Upper East Side apartment, Sage found herself studying his profile. Strong jaw, straight nose, dark hair that always looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But more than his physical attractiveness, there was something solid and dependable about Carter that she was only beginning to appreciate. He'd offered to help her without knowing the details of her situation, without calculating what it might cost him personally. When was the last time someone had done that for her? Thank you, she said quietly as they stopped at a red light. Carter glanced over at her, his expression gentle. For what? For caring, for offering to help, for not asking questions I'm not ready to answer. You don't need to thank me for basic human decency, Carter replied. Though I have to admit, my motivations aren't entirely altruistic. No? Carter's smile was slightly self-deprecating. I've gotten used to having you around, Sage Mitchell. I'm not ready to let David, whatever his name is, scare you away from New York before I've had a chance to see where this leads. The honesty in his admission made Sage's chest tighten with emotion. And where do you think it's leading? I have no idea, Carter said as the light turned green. But I'm looking forward to finding out. As they drove through the city streets, Sage felt some of the tension that had been coiled in her shoulders since receiving David's message begin to ease. She still didn't know how to handle his reappearance in her life, still wasn't sure what his endgame was, or how far he was willing to go to get whatever he wanted from her. But for the first time since leaving Chicago, she wasn't facing those questions alone. And maybe, she thought as she watched Carter navigate the traffic with confident ease, that would make all the difference. Carter's apartment building was exactly what she'd expected, a pre-war high-rise on East 72nd Street, with a doorman who knew Carter by name and a lobby that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was smooth and silent, giving Sage time to process the reality of what she'd agreed to. She was going to spend the night in Carter Blackwood's apartment. The man she was fake engaged to, the man she was increasingly attracted to, the man who'd just offered to protect her from threats he didn't fully understand. This was either the smartest decision she'd made since arriving in New York, or the most dangerous. She was beginning to suspect it might be both. Manhattan, New York, Carter's Upper East Side apartment. Carter's apartment was a study in understated luxury that somehow managed to feel like a home rather than a showpiece. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, while exposed brick walls and carefully chosen artwork created an atmosphere that was sophisticated without being cold. The space felt distinctly masculine but welcoming, with deep leather furniture arranged around a fireplace that probably wasn't just for show. This is beautiful, Sage said softly, setting her purse down on a side table that looked like it might be a genuine antique. She'd expected something more ostentatious, more obviously expensive, but Carter's apartment felt lived in and comfortable in a way that surprised her. "Thank you. I actually decorated it myself, which scandalized my mother," Carter replied, hanging their coats in a closet near the entrance. "She kept insisting I needed a professional interior designer, someone who understood proper Manhattan style, but I wanted it to feel like me, not like a magazine spread." Sage wandered toward the windows, drawn by the view of the park bathed in golden afternoon light. From this height, the trees looked like a living carpet spread out below them, and she could see joggers and dog walkers following the winding paths like tiny figures in a painting. "It does feel like you," she said, then immediately wondered if that was appropriate to say. How well did she really know Carter, beyond their carefully constructed professional relationship, and the growing attraction that was becoming harder to ignore? "Good," Carter said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That was the goal. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, wine, something stronger? It's been a stressful afternoon." Sage turned back to find Carter watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. There was concern there, certainly, but also something warmer, more personal. The way he was looking at her made her hyper-aware of the fact that they were alone in his private space, surrounded by the intimate details of his life. "Wine sounds perfect," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the butterflies in her stomach. Carter moved to a well-stocked bar cart near the kitchen, pulling out a bottle that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. His movements were efficient and graceful, and Sage found herself studying the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he reached for glasses, the way his dark hair caught the light from the windows. "So," Carter said as he poured 2 glasses of what looked like an exceptional burgundy, "we should probably talk about David Hartley and what his reappearance might mean for your safety." The mention of David's name sent a chill through Sage that had nothing to do with the temperature in the apartment. She accepted the wine glass Carter offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and settled into one of the leather armchairs near the fireplace. "I don't even know where to begin," she admitted, taking a sip of wine that was smooth and rich and probably older than she was. "David is a partner at Henderson & Associates, the firm where I worked in Chicago. Charming, successful, well-connected in all the right circles. When I first started there, everyone treated him like he walked on water." "But you discovered otherwise," Carter prompted gently, settling into the chair across from her with his own glass. "It took me almost 2 years to piece it all together," Sage said, staring into her wine as the memories came flooding back. Small inconsistencies in client accounts, documents that didn't quite match up, payments that seemed to disappear into administrative costs. David was very careful, very sophisticated in how he was stealing from the firm and its clients. Carter leaned forward slightly, his full attention focused on her story. "What kind of amounts are we talking about?" "Over $3 million spread across dozens of accounts over a period of 5 years, Sage replied, her voice hollow with remembered shock. "He was brilliant at it, really. Never took enough from any single account to raise immediate red flags. Always had plausible explanations for discrepancies. Always made sure someone else could potentially take the blame if questions were asked." "Someone like you," Carter said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Sage nodded, feeling the familiar knot of anger and betrayal tighten in her chest. "I was the perfect fall guy, junior associate, access to all the accounts, ambitious enough to potentially justify embezzlement as a way to get ahead faster. When I brought my evidence to the senior partners, David had already prepared a counter-narrative that painted me as the mastermind and him as another victim." "But you had proof," Carter said, his voice taking on the sharp edge she'd heard earlier when he'd promised to protect her. "I thought I did. But David was smarter than I gave him credit for. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already begun planting evidence that implicated me. Forged documents with my electronic signature, fake email trails showing me authorizing suspicious transfers, Even testimony from other employees who'd been convinced I was acting suspiciously. Carter set down his wine glass with deliberate care, and Sage could see the muscles in his jaw tighten with suppressed anger. "How long did it take to clear your name?" 8 months, Sage said softly. 8 months of investigations, depositions, character assassination in the legal community, and financial ruin from legal fees. Even after the FBI finally uncovered enough evidence to arrest David and clear me of all charges, my reputation was destroyed. No firm in Chicago would hire me, and the story had spread far enough that my prospects in other major legal markets were severely limited. "So you came to New York for a fresh start," Carter concluded. "I came to New York because it was the only place far enough away from Chicago where I might have a chance to rebuild my career," Sage corrected. "I used my grandmother's maiden name on my apartment lease, changed my phone number, even altered my hairstyle and started wearing different clothes. I thought I'd covered my tracks completely. But David found you anyway." Sage pulled out her phone and showed Carter the messages she'd received earlier. His expression grew darker with each text, and she could practically see him cataloging the implied threats and calculating potential responses. "He's escalating," Carter observed grimly. "The tone of these messages suggests he's planning something more direct than just harassment." "That's what I'm afraid of," Sage admitted. David doesn't handle losing well, and his arrest and conviction cost him everything. His partnership, his reputation, his freedom. He spent 18 months in federal prison, and I'm sure he spent every day planning his revenge against the people he blames for his downfall, which would be you primarily. "Which would be me specifically," Sage agreed. "In David's mind, I'm the reason his life fell apart. Not his own greed or criminal behavior, but my decision to report what I'd discovered instead of keeping quiet and letting him continue stealing." Carter was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass while he processed everything she'd told him. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes were blazing with a protective fury that made Sage's breath catch in her throat. "He's not going to hurt you," Carter said with quiet certainty. "Whatever he's planning, whatever he thinks he's going to accomplish by threatening you, it's not going to happen." "Carter, you don't understand what you're up against," Sage protested. "David is intelligent, connected, and completely ruthless. He has nothing left to lose and everything to gain by making my life miserable. Getting involved in this situation could destroy everything you've worked for, everything your family has built." "Stop," Carter interrupted firmly, standing up and moving to her chair. He knelt beside it, taking her hands in his larger ones, the engagement ring catching the light between their joined fingers. "Listen to me, Sage. I don't care about David's connections or his resources or whatever revenge fantasies he's been nurturing in prison. I care about you. I care about your safety and your happiness and your peace of mind. But your inheritance will mean nothing if something happens to you," Carter said fiercely. "Don't you understand? Somewhere in the past week, this stopped being about my grandfather's ultimatum or securing my position at the firm. This became about you, about us. About whatever this is that's been building between us since the moment you walked into my office." Sage stared into Carter's eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine care and concern that had nothing to do with their original business arrangement. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? When was the last time someone had been willing to risk their own interests for her well-being? "Carter," she began, but he shook his head. "I know this is complicated. I know we started this as a fake engagement, a mutually beneficial arrangement that was supposed to solve our respective problems without any emotional entanglements," Carter said, his thumbs stroking gently across her knuckles. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fake for me. My feelings for you are real, Sage. The way I want to protect you, the way I think about you when you're not around, the way my heart speeds up every time you smile at me. None of that is performance or pretense." "This is dangerous territory," Sage whispered, though she made no move to pull her hands away from his. "I know," Carter agreed softly, "but maybe some risks are worth taking." Before Sage could respond, her phone buzzed with another message. Both of them tensed automatically. and Carter's grip on her hands tightened protectively. "It's just Jenny from the office," Sage said after checking the screen, relief evident in her voice. "She's asking about engagement party details." "Right. The party." Carter released her hands and stood up, running his fingers through his hair in the gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of processing stress. "We probably should discuss that, shouldn't we? Make sure we're prepared for tomorrow night." Tomorrow night. Sage had almost forgotten about the elaborate engagement party Eleanor had planned, the 200 guests who would be there to celebrate her fake relationship with Carter. The thought of smiling and playing the happy bride-to-be while David's threats loomed over her life felt surreal and overwhelming. "Maybe we should postpone it," she suggested, "until this situation with David is resolved." "Absolutely not," Carter said immediately. "Postponing the party would raise questions we're not prepared to answer, and more importantly, it would let David control your life. He's already stolen enough from you, Sage. I won't let him take this too." "But what if he shows up? What if he causes a scene?" Carter's smile was sharp and predatory in a way that reminded Sage he was one of Manhattan's most successful attorneys. "Then he'll discover what happens when someone threatens a member of the Blackwood family. Security will be tight, guest lists will be carefully monitored, and David Hartley will find himself very unwelcome if he tries to crash our party." The possessive way Carter said, "our party," sent warmth flooding through Sage's chest. When had she stopped thinking of their engagement as purely fictional? When had the idea of being genuinely connected to Carter started feeling not just appealing, but necessary? "Besides," Carter continued, settling back into his chair with renewed energy, "the party will be perfect cover for us to make some strategic moves regarding David's threats. Half the legal community will be there, including several federal prosecutors who worked on his original case. If David is planning something, having that many witnesses and potential allies in one place works to our advantage." "You're talking about this like it's a chess game," Sage observed. "Everything is a chess game when you're dealing with someone like David," Carter replied. "The key is making sure we're several moves ahead of whatever he's planning." They spent the next hour discussing strategies for the engagement party, from guest list management to security protocols to contingency plans if David made any kind of appearance. Carter's legal mind was formidable when focused on a problem, and Sage found herself feeling more confident about their ability to handle whatever David might throw at them. As evening approached, Carter ordered dinner from what was obviously a favorite restaurant. Italian food that arrived via private delivery and tasted like it had been prepared by someone's Italian grandmother. They ate at his dining room table as the sun set over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reflected off the windows of the apartment buildings across the park. "This is nice," Sage said softly, gesturing toward the view with her fork. "Peaceful." "It's one of the reasons I chose this apartment," Carter agreed. "Sometimes you need a reminder that there's beauty in the world, especially when you spend your days dealing with corporate disputes and family drama." "Is that what drew you to law? The family business or something else?" Carter was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Honestly, I never really considered doing anything else. From the time I was old enough to understand what the family firm represented, it was always assumed I'd follow in the footsteps. Law school, junior associate position, gradual rise through the ranks until I eventually took over from my grandfather." "But is it what you want?" Sage pressed gently. "If you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose?" The question seemed to surprise Carter, as if no one had ever asked him to consider his own desires separate from family expectations. I don't know," he admitted. "I've been so focused on proving I deserve to inherit the firm that I've never really thought about whether it's what would make me happy." "What did you love doing when you were a child, before you understood about family expectations and legacy?" A slow smile spread across Carter's face as he thought back. "Building things. Architecture, actually. I used to spend hours with Legos, constructing elaborate buildings and cities. I had this fantasy about designing skyscrapers that would change the Manhattan skyline." "That's a beautiful dream," Sage said warmly. "What stopped you from pursuing it?" "Reality, I suppose. Architecture is competitive, unpredictable, and my grandfather made it clear that the family firm needed me more than the world needed another architect. Carter shrugged, but Sage could see the wistfulness in his expression. Besides, I'm good at law. I may not be passionate about corporate litigation, but I have a natural talent for it. Being good at something and loving something aren't the same thing, Sage pointed out. No, they're not, Carter agreed quietly. What about you? Did you always want to be a lawyer? Actually, yes, Sage said with a smile. My parents died when I was 12 and I was raised by my grandmother. She was a legal secretary for 40 years, and she used to tell me stories about the cases she worked on, the way good lawyers could help people who had nowhere else to turn. I wanted to be one of those lawyers, someone who fought for justice, who protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Like you tried to do with David's victims, Carter observed. Like I tried to do, Sage confirmed, though that didn't exactly work out the way I'd hoped. You saved those people from losing even more money to David's schemes, Carter said firmly. You sacrificed your own career and reputation to do the right thing. That's exactly the kind of lawyer your grandmother hoped you'd become. The sincerity in his voice made Sage's eyes prick with unexpected tears. She'd spent so many months questioning her decision to report David, wondering if she'd been naive or foolish to think justice would prevail over wealth and connections. Hearing Carter frame her actions as heroic rather than stupid felt like a healing balm on wounds she'd almost forgotten were still tender. Thank you, she said softly, for saying that, for seeing it that way. It's not about how I see it, Sage. It's about what actually happened. You're a hero, whether you recognize it or not. The conversation continued as they finished dinner, ranging from childhood memories to career aspirations to travel dreams they'd never had time to pursue. Sage found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since leaving Chicago, laughing at Carter's stories about disastrous family vacations and sharing her own tales of growing up with a grandmother who had strong opinions about everything from politics to proper dinner etiquette. When they finally cleared the dinner dishes, the city sparkled below them like a constellation that had fallen to earth. The apartment felt warm and intimate, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes from genuine connection. I should probably show you to the guest room, Carter said eventually, though he made no immediate move to get up from the dining table. You've had a long, stressful day. I have, Sage agreed, but she also wasn't ready for the evening to end. Something had shifted between them over dinner, some barrier had dissolved, and the prospect of being alone with her thoughts and David's threats felt suddenly unappealing. Unless, Carter began, then stopped himself. Unless what? Unless you'd rather stay up for a while longer. We could watch a movie or just talk or whatever you need to feel safe and comfortable. The offer was clearly genuine, with no ulterior motives or hidden agenda. Carter was simply offering his company because he sensed she might need it, and the thoughtfulness of the gesture made Sage's heart clench with gratitude and something deeper. I'd like that, she said quietly. If you don't mind. I'm not sure I'm ready to be alone with my thoughts just yet. Carter's smile was warm and understanding. Of course. What sounds appealing? Movie, music, conversation, or we could just sit and enjoy the view. Conversation, Sage said without hesitation. I feel like I've learned more about you in the past few hours than I knew after a week of working together. That's because we've stopped performing for each other, Carter observed, moving to the living room area and settling onto the leather sofa. No more fake relationship protocols or professional boundaries, just us being honest about who we are and what we want. Sage curled up on the opposite end of the sofa, tucking her feet under her and marveling at how natural it felt to be in Carter's space, sharing his furniture, existing in his private world. And what do you want, Carter? Really? Carter was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face in the soft lamplight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. I want to wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you. I want to know all your favorite things, books, movies, foods, places you've dreamed of traveling. I want to be the person you call when something wonderful happens, and the person you trust when everything falls apart. He paused, then continued even more quietly. I want to find out if this connection we have is as real and as powerful as it feels right now. Sage's breath caught in her throat. The honesty in Carter's words, the vulnerability in his expression, the way he was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his world, it all combined to create a moment of perfect clarity. She was in love with him. The realization hit her like lightning, illuminating everything that had been building between them since that first day in his office. The fake engagement had become real for her too, somewhere along the way, without her even recognizing when it happened. Sage? Carter's voice was gentle, concerned. Did I say too much? I don't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. You didn't, Sage interrupted softly, leaning forward slightly. Carter, I need to tell you something. Anything. This isn't fake for me either, not anymore. The words came out in a rush, as if she needed to say them quickly before she lost her courage. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between your ridiculous declaration and tonight, I started falling for you. Really falling for you. Carter's expression transformed, hope and joy, and something deeper flickering across his features. Really? Really, Sage confirmed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Which terrifies me because I came to New York specifically to avoid complications like this. I wanted a clean slate, a fresh start, a life where I didn't have to depend on anyone else or risk getting hurt again. And now I'm sitting in your apartment, wearing your great-great-grandmother's ring, and realizing that the best things in life might be worth the risk after all. Carter moved closer on the sofa, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him. What are you saying, Sage? I'm saying that maybe we should stop calling this a fake engagement, she whispered. Maybe we should see what happens if we make it real. Carter's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face with joy and relief, and something that looked very much like love. Are you sure? Because once we cross that line, there's no going back to our original arrangement. No more professional boundaries or predetermined end dates. I'm sure, Sage said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Carter reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind, and cupped her face gently in his hands. I'm going to kiss you now, he said softly. Not because we're performing for anyone, not because it's part of our cover story, but because I've been wanting to kiss you since the moment you walked into my office dripping rainwater and looking absolutely beautiful. I looked like a drowned rat, Sage protested weakly. You looked like the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking, Carter corrected, leaning closer until his forehead rested against hers. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the polite pecks on the cheek they'd shared for public consumption. This was slow and deep and devastating, full of weeks of suppressed attraction and genuine emotion. Carter's lips were warm and gentle but insistent, and when Sage kissed him back with equal fervor, she heard him make a low sound of satisfaction that sent heat racing through her veins. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Sage felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Wow, she breathed. Yeah, Carter agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Wow. They stayed like that for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing the same air, marveling at the magnitude of what had just changed between them. So, Sage said finally, a smile tugging at her lips. I guess we're really engaged now. I guess we are, Carter agreed, his own smile bright enough to power half of Manhattan. Think we can convince your family? I think, Carter said, brushing a strand of hair away from her face with infinite gentleness, that after a kiss like that, convincing anyone we're madly in love will be the easiest part of this entire arrangement. Sage laughed, feeling lighter and happier than she had in months. Good, because your grandmother has planned a party for 200 people, and I'd hate to disappoint her. Trust me, Carter said, pulling her closer until she was curled against his side. After tomorrow night, no one will have any doubts about how we feel about each other. As they settled together on the sofa, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the windows, Sage realized that everything about her carefully planned fresh start had changed. She was no longer running from her past or hiding from complications. She was choosing love, choosing trust, choosing the risk of building something beautiful with someone who saw her for exactly who she was. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely perfect. And when Carter's arms tightened around her protectively, she realized that for the first time since leaving Chicago, she felt truly safe. Tomorrow they would face David's threats and the pressure of convincing 200 guests that their love was real. But tonight, in the quiet intimacy of Carter's apartment, with his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek and his fingers stroking gently through her hair, Sage allowed herself to believe that some fairy tales might actually come true. Even the ones that started with the wrong girl walking through the right door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon.